I meet a lot of practicing scientists who want to know how to break into popular science writing, and we want you to write popular science, but people often don't know where to start. So here's my quick guide to breaking in. The great news is that, as you've probably noticed, there's a ton of appetite for popular science writing online. Whatever specialty you're in, psychology or physics or paleontology, you've probably noticed your Facebook is flooded with articles from popular magazines writing about your area of expertise. And unfortunately, I'm sure you have a lot of horror stories of popular science writers totally messing up the details when they write about your work. I think this is why it's really important that practicing scientists get into the popular science writing game. You obviously have a unique and important perspective to share about the things you know best about. The first thing I think you need to know to break into popular science writing is that there are essentially two types of popular science writing. Two. The first I call popular science for science enthusiasts, and the second I would call popular science for science apathetics. Let's start with science enthusiasts. This kind of writing is embodied by great magazines like Popular Science. You'll notice that while they're writing for a general reader, it's a general reader who really enjoys science for its own sake. This is someone who would enjoy learning about the mechanisms of how things work, even if it had no impact on their day-to-day life. I think it's important, even when writing for science enthusiasts, though, to remember to ask yourself, why does this person need to know what I'm telling them? So for instance, in any area of science, there's a lot of lingo, a lot of jargon for very specific elements of all kinds of problems. And as a popular science reader, you don't necessarily need to know all the names for things. If you're not going to encounter the same phenomenon again, sometimes it's better as a writer to just explain what something does, but not explain in detail what it's called and how it relates to everything else in the field. I think that a lot of practicing scientists find writing for science enthusiasts that little bit easier, because in a sense it's something that you're used to doing every day when you discuss your particular subfield with your colleagues who work in other areas. I think one really important thing to remember when doing this kind of writing is what's called the curse of knowledge. It's often very hard when you know about something intimately to remember what level even interested non-experts are at. And I think that within all of our friend groups are quite tightly selected. We often talk to people who are much more similar to us than the rest of the world as a whole. I think that often what seems like common knowledge in our particular friend group is just not something other people normally know. Science apathetics are not anti-science in any way, they're just not interested in science for its own sake. So whenever you're explaining science in an article for that kind of general audience, you really need to hook it onto something that they do care about. So that might be a really concrete application, it might be human psychology, which I think everyone seems to find interesting, social life, or it might be news and current events. I think a good way to keep yourself on track with this is to use an analogy. So suppose you don't really care about the TV show House of Cards. You wouldn't click on an article if it just said, here's an article about House of Cards. But you might still click on the same article if it said it was going to explain some current situation in international affairs, using the example of House of Cards. You might click on an article that said it was going to explain human psychology or relationships through the example of House of Cards. I think, obviously this is, one content matter rather than science as a whole, but I think there are a lot of readers who are interested in science when it can explain or elucidate something in their lives, but don't want to read about it again for its own sake. That doesn't mean that you can't have fun and explain the meaning of things or how things work. I mean, I think there is a spark of intellectual curiosity that everyone can enjoy. It's just about keeping those things limited to the deep, high-level insights and not going into all the details. So that's my quick wrap-up of how to do popular science writing for a general audience. And yeah, I really hope you give it a go. I think the world needs more practicing scientists writing popular science.